The pain shooting through Clara Bennett's left ankle was nothing compared to the panic rising in her chest as she watched 30 head of cattle beginning to scatter across the Wyoming grassland in 3 different directions. It was late September 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the open range just north of Cheyenne. Clara had been working her father's ranch for the past 5 years, ever since her mother passed, and she knew cattle better than most men twice her age. But knowing cattle did not change the fact that she had stepped wrong coming down from a rocky outcrop 20 minutes ago. And now her ankle throbbed with a pain so sharp it made her vision blur. She had tried to mount her horse, a steady mare named Bess, but the moment she put weight on her left foot to swing into the saddle, she had nearly blacked out. The cattle, sensing the lack of firm guidance, had grown restless and were now making their break for freedom across the wide open plain. Clara whistled sharply, trying to turn the lead steer, but her voice came out strained and weak. She limped forward, gritting her teeth against the agony, knowing that if she lost these cattle, her father would lose a significant portion of their winter income. They were supposed to be moved to the southern pasture today, a task her father had entrusted to her while he rode into town for supplies. She had insisted she could handle it alone. She had been so confident, so certain of her abilities. Now she was paying the price for her pride. Just as tears of frustration began to sting her eyes, Clara heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast from the east. She turned, shielding her eyes from the sun, and saw a rider coming at full gallop. The horse was a magnificent chestnut stallion, and the man atop it sat with the easy confidence of someone born in the saddle. As he drew closer, Clara could make out his features. A strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble, dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath a worn leather hat, and eyes that seemed to take in the entire situation in a single sweeping glance. The cowboy did not slow down or stop to ask questions. He assessed the scattering cattle, then looked at Clara, taking in her awkward stance and the way she favored her right leg. His eyes met hers for just a moment, long enough for Clara to see they were a startling shade of gray-blue like storm clouds over the mountains. Then he was moving, spurring his horse toward the cattle with practiced precision. Clara watched, helpless and amazed, as the stranger took control of the situation with remarkable skill. He rode hard toward the northernmost group of cattle, cutting them off before they could reach a steep ravine. His horse responded to the slightest pressure, wheeling and turning with perfect timing. The cowboy let out a sharp whistle, different from Clara's but clearly understood by the cattle, and they began to turn. Within minutes, he had gathered that group and was driving them back toward the main herd. Clara tried again to mount Bess, desperate to help, but the pain was too intense. She had to grip the saddle horn to keep from falling, breathing hard through her nose to fight the nausea that accompanied each wave of agony. She hated feeling useless, hated that a complete stranger was doing her job while she stood there like a helpless child. The cowboy worked with swift efficiency, and Clara found herself studying him despite her frustration. He moved with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. His rope work was flawless, using it not to catch but to guide, swinging it in wide arcs to turn stubborn cattle back toward the group. He seemed to anticipate every move the animals would make, positioning himself perfectly to counter their attempts at escape. Within half an hour, all 30 head were gathered in a tight group, milling but no longer scattering. Only then did the stranger ride back to where Clara stood, still gripping her saddle. He dismounted in one smooth motion and approached her, his expression serious but not unkind. Up close, Clara could see he was probably in his mid-20s, just a few years older than her own 22 years. He was tall and lean, with the weathered skin of someone who spent every day outdoors. There was a kindness in his eyes that surprised her, given the rough company most cowboys kept. "That ankle needs tending," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried traces of Texas or perhaps Oklahoma. "You are not riding anywhere on it." "I can manage," Clara said, though even she could hear how unconvincing she sounded. "I just need to get these cattle to the south pasture. It is only about 2 miles from here." The cowboy looked at her steadily, and Clara felt her cheeks flush under his gaze. There was no judgment in his expression, but there was a firmness that suggested he was not going to be argued with. "I will drive your cattle. You're going to sit in that shade over there and stay off that ankle before you do permanent damage to it." "I do not even know who you are," Clara protested, though her ankle was screaming at her to accept his help. "Why would you help me?" "Name is James Cordell," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I just signed on at the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles east of here. I was riding the boundaries when I saw your situation. As for why I am helping, well, seems like the right thing to do. Now please, miss, sit down before you fall down." There was something in his tone, a gentle concern that cut through Clara's stubborn pride. She realized she was swaying slightly on her feet, and the pain had become a constant nauseating throb. Reluctantly, she nodded. James immediately stepped forward, and before Clara could protest, he had lifted her easily into his arms. "I can walk," she said, but her voice was weak. "Not on my watch," James replied, carrying her to a cluster of cottonwood trees about 50 yards away. He set her down gently in the shade, then retrieved his canteen from his saddle and brought it back to her. "Drink. You look pale." Clara drank gratefully, the cool water soothing her dry throat. She watched as James returned to the cattle, working with the same quiet competence he had shown before. He had tied Bess to his own horse's saddle, and now he began moving the herd south. Clara called out directions to him, telling him about the landmarks to watch for and the gate that would lead into the south pasture. James acknowledged each instruction with a nod or a raised hand, never appearing annoyed or impatient with her guidance. As Clara sat in the shade watching James work, she found her initial frustration giving way to something else. Admiration, certainly. The man was clearly an exceptional cowboy. But there was something more. A flutter in her chest that she tried to dismiss as simply the result of her injury and the stress of nearly losing the cattle. Still, she could not stop watching the way he moved, the confidence and strength in every gesture, the gentleness with which he handled both horses and cattle. It took James nearly an hour to move the herd to the south pasture, and by the time he returned, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Clara had used the time to examine her ankle as best she could through her boot. It was swollen, she could tell, and the pain had not diminished. She suspected it was a bad sprain, though she hoped desperately it was not broken. James rode up to the cottonwoods and dismounted, leading both horses. "Got them all into the pasture and secured the gate," he reported. "They should be fine there. Now we need to figure out what to do about you." "I can ride back to my ranch," Clara said, though the thought of mounting a horse made her want to cry. "It is not far, maybe 3 miles north of here." James knelt down beside her and with surprising gentleness said, "May I look at your ankle? I have dealt with plenty of sprains and breaks over the years." Clara hesitated, then nodded. James carefully removed her boot, and Clara could not suppress a gasp of pain as the leather pulled away from her swollen ankle. James's expression grew more serious as he examined the injury, his fingers probing gently but thoroughly. "It is not broken," he said finally, "but this is a significant sprain. You need to keep weight off it for at least a week, preferably 2. Ice would help, and you need to keep it elevated." "A week?" Clara echoed, dismay flooding through her. "I cannot stay off my feet for a week. There's too much work to be done on the ranch. My father cannot handle everything alone." James sat back on his heels, studying her face. "You have a choice. You can rest it now and be back to full strength in 2 weeks, or you can keep working on it and risk permanent damage that could leave you limping for the rest of your life. Which would be more useful to your father?" Clara knew he was right, but the knowledge did not make it any easier to accept. She looked away, blinking back tears of frustration. "He's going to be so disappointed in me." "Why?" James asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "Because you got hurt doing honest work? That is not something to be ashamed of." "Because I told him I could handle this alone," Clara said quietly. "I wanted to prove I was capable. Instead, I have proven I need rescuing." James was quiet for a moment, then he said, "From where I stand, You were doing just fine until you got injured. And even injured, you were trying to take care of those cattle. That is not weakness. That is strength." Clara looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Their eyes met, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Then James cleared his throat and stood up, breaking the spell. "We need to get you home," he said. "I'm going to lift you onto my horse. You will ride with me. Your mare can follow on her lead." Clara wanted to protest, to insist she could ride alone, but she knew it was impossible. She nodded, and James once again lifted her into his arms. This time Clara was acutely aware of the strength in his arms, the solid warmth of his chest, and the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to him. He placed her side saddle on his chestnut stallion, then mounted behind her, his arms coming around to grip the reins. "Which direction?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Clara's heart was suddenly beating far too fast, and she told herself firmly it was just the pain and stress of the day. "North," she managed to say. "Follow that ridgeline. You will see the ranch buildings once we crest the next rise." They rode in silence for a while, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait strangely soothing. Clara was intensely aware of James behind her, of the strength of the arm he had wrapped around her waist to keep her steady in the saddle. She wanted to make conversation, to thank him properly, but she could not seem to find the right words. "Have you been ranching long?" James asked, as if sensing her discomfort with the silence. "All my life," Clara replied, grateful for the opening. "This is my family's land. My father started the ranch 23 years ago, right after he married my mother. I was born the following year." "Just you and your father run the whole operation?" "Yes, my mother passed 5 years ago. We had a few hired hands for a while, but we have not been able to afford them the past 2 seasons. Cattle prices have been down." James nodded, and Clara could feel the movement. "It has been a hard few years for a lot of ranchers. The Triple Bar is one of the bigger operations in the area. I was lucky to get hired on." "Where are you from originally?" Clara asked, curious despite herself. "Born in Texas, grew up moving from ranch to ranch as my father followed work. He was a horse trainer, one of the best. He died when I was 17, and I've been making my own way since then. Worked ranches all through Texas and Oklahoma before deciding to head north. Wyoming seemed like it might offer some opportunities." "Do you have any other family?" James was quiet for a moment. "A sister. She married a shopkeeper in San Antonio 3 years ago. We write when we can, but I have not seen her since the wedding." Clara heard the note of loneliness in his voice and felt a pang of sympathy. That must be hard, being so far from her. "It is the life I chose," James said simply. "A drifting cowboy does not make for close family ties, but I would not trade the freedom for anything." Clara wanted to ask more, but they had crested the rise and the Bennett ranch came into view below them. It was not a large operation, just a main house, a barn, a stable, and a few outbuildings, but Clara had always thought it was beautiful in its simplicity. The house was built of solid logs, weathered gray by years of Wyoming sun and wind, with a wide porch that her mother had loved. The barn was sturdy and well-maintained, painted red in better years, though the color had faded now. As they approached, Clara saw her father emerge from the barn, a bucket in his hand. He was a tall man, still strong despite his 50 years, with gray threading heavily through his brown hair and beard. When he saw Clara riding with a strange man, his expression shifted immediately from surprise to concern. "Clara!" he called out, setting down the bucket and striding toward them. "What happened?" James brought the horse to a stop in front of the house and carefully helped Clara down, supporting her weight so her injured ankle did not touch the ground. Clara's father hurried over, his weathered face creased with worry. "I twisted my ankle badly while moving the cattle to South Pasture," Clara explained quickly, seeing the alarm in her father's eyes. "The cattle started to scatter and Mr. Cordell here came to help. He gathered them and brought me home." Her father looked at James, his expression unreadable. "Thomas Bennett," he said, extending his hand. "I am in your debt, Mr. Cordell." James shook his hand firmly. "No debt, sir. I was glad to help. but your daughter needs to stay off that ankle for at least a week, preferably 2. It is a significant sprain. Thomas Bennett's face paled slightly. A week? But we have so much work to be done before winter sets in. I understand, James said, and Clara could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. If you would like, I could come by in the mornings before my shift at the Triple Bar and help with the essential tasks. It would not be much, maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, but it might make a difference. Clara stared at James in surprise. Thomas Bennett looked equally taken aback. That is generous of you, Mr. Cordell, but I could not ask that of you. You have your own work to attend to. You are not asking, I am offering, James said. I start at the Triple Bar at 10 in the morning most days. I could be here by 6, give you 3 good hours of work. It is no trouble. Clara saw her father's pride warring with practicality. Finally, practicality won. I would appreciate that, Mr. Cordell, and please call me Thomas. If you're going to be working here, even temporarily, there is no need for formality. James? The cowboy replied with a slight smile. Now let us get Clara inside. That ankle needs ice and elevation. Between the 2 men, they got Clara into the house and settled on the old sofa in the main room. Thomas went to fetch ice from the ice house while James found some extra pillows to prop up her leg. Clara watched him move around her home with an easy confidence that should have seemed intrusive, but somehow did not. You really do not have to do this, Clara said quietly as James arranged the pillows under her ankle. Help with the ranch works, I mean. You have already done more than enough. James met her eyes, and again Clara felt that strange flutter in her chest. I know I do not have to, he said, but I want to. Besides, I have a feeling you will worry yourself sick if you think your father is struggling out there alone. This way, you can rest and heal properly. Thomas returned with a cloth wrapped around a chunk of ice, and James showed him how to position it on Clara's ankle. The cold brought immediate relief, and Clara sighed despite herself. James stood preparing to leave, and Clara found herself wishing he would stay longer. I will be here at 6 tomorrow morning, James said to Thomas. What would be most helpful? The north fence line needs repair, Thomas said. Several posts are rotting and need replacing before the first snow. And we need to bring the horses in from the far pasture for winter shoeing. James nodded. I can handle both. I will see you in the morning. He turned to Clara, touching the brim of his hat. You take care of that ankle, Miss Bennett. Follow the instructions I gave your father. Clara, she said impulsively, if you are going to be working here, you should call me Clara. Something warm flickered in James's eyes. Clara, he repeated, and the way he said her name made her heart skip a beat. Then he was gone, striding out the door with that same easy confidence, leaving Clara feeling strangely bereft. Thomas closed the door and turned to his daughter, his expression thoughtful. That is quite a man, he said. We were lucky he came along when he did. Yes, Clara agreed softly, staring at the door through which James had disappeared. Very lucky. That night, Clara lay in her bed, unable to sleep despite the laudanum her father had given her for the pain. Her ankle throbbed, but that was not what kept her awake. She kept thinking about James, about the kindness in his eyes and the gentle strength of his hands. She thought about the way he had taken charge of the situation without making her feel inadequate, the way he had offered help without expecting anything in return. She had known plenty of cowboys in her 22 years, but none like James Cordell. She told herself she was being foolish, that he was simply a good man doing a good deed, nothing more. He would help for a week or 2 until she was back on her feet, and then he would return to his life at the Triple Bar Ranch. She would probably never see him again. The thought made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with her injured ankle. True to his word, James arrived at 6 o'clock the next morning. Clara heard the sound of his horse and pulled herself out of bed, ignoring her father's protests that she should rest. She hobbled to the window using a crutch her father had fashioned from an old broom handle and watched as James dismounted and greeted Thomas in the yard. Even from this distance, Clara could see the easy smile on James's face, the way he listened attentively as Thomas explained the day's work. He had rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms bronzed by the sun, and Clara felt her cheeks heat as she realized she was staring. She forced herself to turn away from the window, making her slow way to the kitchen to start breakfast. By the time Thomas and James came in for the midday meal, James had already replaced 4 fence posts and brought in half the horses from the far pasture. Clara had managed to prepare a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, though it had taken her twice as long as usual, and she had to sit down every few minutes to rest her ankle. James and Thomas were deep in conversation about the ranch when they entered, but James fell silent when he saw Clara standing at the stove. He frowned, concern crossing his face. "You should not be on your feet," he said, moving toward her. "I have been sitting most of the morning," Clara protested, though in truth her ankle was aching fiercely. "I needed to do something useful." "You are useful when you are healing," James said firmly. He glanced at Thomas. "Is she always this stubborn?" Thomas chuckled. "Every day of her life. Gets it from her mother." James shook his head, but there was a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Miss Clara, since you have already prepared this excellent meal, the least we can do is serve you. You go sit down at the table, and we will bring the food." Clara wanted to argue, but the determined look in James's eyes told her it would be useless. She made her way to the table and sat down, watching as James and her father served the meal with surprising efficiency. It felt strange, being waited on in her own home, but also oddly touching. Over the meal, Thomas and James discussed the work that still needed to be done. Clara listened, occasionally offering suggestions or information about where supplies were kept. She noticed how James listened carefully to everything she said, never dismissing her input or treating her as if her injury had somehow diminished her knowledge. It was refreshing considering how many men she had met who seemed to think a woman's opinions on ranching were worthless. As the days passed, a pattern emerged. James would arrive at 6 in the morning and work until 9, then head to the Triple Bar for his regular duties. He would often return in the evening for an hour or two, helping with whatever needed doing around the ranch. Clara found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. Her ankle was healing, though slowly. By the end of the first week, she could put a little weight on it, enough to move around the house without the crutch. By the end of the second week, she was able to walk short distances, though her father and James both insisted she continue to rest as much as possible. During those 2 weeks, Clara found herself talking with James more and more. Sometimes it was while he took a brief rest between tasks, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. Sometimes it was during meals, when the 3 of them would linger at the table, conversation flowing easily. Clara learned that James was 26, that he had a gift for gentling difficult horses, and that he had once dreamed of having his own ranch but had never stayed in one place long enough to make it happen. James, in turn, learned about Clara's life on the ranch, about how she had learned to rope and ride almost before she could walk, about her love for the wide-open spaces of Wyoming. He learned about her mother, who had been a school teacher before marrying Thomas, and how Clara still had all her books, reading them over and over because new ones were a rare luxury. He learned that Clara could outshoot most men with a rifle and that she had a gift for knowing when a cow was about to calve or when a horse was coming down with colic. What neither of them spoke about, though both felt it, was the growing connection between them. It was there in the way James's eyes lingered on Clara's face when he thought she was not looking. It was there in the way Clara found excuses to be wherever James was working, just to be near him. It was there in the accidental touches, a brush of hands when passing a plate, a steadying grip when Clara stumbled that seemed to carry an electric charge. Thomas noticed, of course. He said nothing, but Clara caught him watching them sometimes, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. Clara could not tell if he approved or not, and she was almost afraid to ask. At the end of the second week, Clara's ankle had healed enough that she could return to light work. James had accomplished everything on Thomas's list, and more. The fences were repaired, the horses were all in and shod, the barn roof had been patched, and a dozen other small tasks that had been piling up were now complete. There was no longer any practical reason for James to keep coming by. The night before what was supposed to be James's last morning at the Bennett Ranch, Clara barely slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that it was for the best. James had his own life, his own path to follow. She had known from the beginning that his help was temporary, but knowing it and accepting it were two very different things. When James arrived the next morning, Clara was already outside, feeding the chickens despite the early hour. He dismounted and walked over to her, his expression unreadable in the dim pre-dawn light. "Your ankle is better," he observed, watching the way she moved. "Much better, thanks to you," Clara said, focusing on scattering the feed so she would not have to meet his eyes. "You have been incredibly helpful, James. I do not know how we would have managed without you." "It was my pleasure," James said quietly. There was a pause, and then he added, "Clara, I need to tell you something." Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She forced herself to look at him, to meet those gray-blue eyes that had haunted her dreams. "What is it?" James took off his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture Clara had come to recognize as a sign he was nervous about something. "These past 2 weeks, working here, getting to know you and your father, it has been some of the best time I've spent in a long while. I know I was just supposed to be helping out, but somewhere along the way it became more than that. For me, anyway." Clara's breath caught. "What are you saying, James?" He looked at her directly, and the intensity in his gaze made her knees weak. "I am saying that I have developed feelings for you, Clara, strong feelings. I know I am just a drifting cowboy with nothing much to offer, and you probably think I am being presumptuous, but I could not leave here this morning without telling you the truth. These past 2 weeks, every morning I woke up looking forward to seeing you. Every evening I left wishing I could stay longer. You are brave and strong and smart, and you care so deeply about everything you do. I have never met anyone like you." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "James, I feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was foolish, but I cannot help it. Every day I found myself watching for you, listening for your horse. When you were here, everything seemed brighter somehow. The thought of you not coming back, it has been breaking my heart." James's face lit up with such joy that Clara caught her breath. He stepped closer, reaching out to gently cup her face with his calloused hand. "Clara Bennett, would you allow me to court you? Properly, I mean. I know I do not have much to offer right now, but I am a hard worker, and I am saving my wages. In time, maybe I could—" "Yes," Clara interrupted, unable to contain her smile. "Yes, James, I would very much like that." James's thumb brushed across her cheek, and the tenderness of the gesture made Clara's heart swell. "I cannot promise you an easy life, not right away, but I can promise you that I will work harder than I ever have, that I will do everything in my power to be worthy of you, and that I will love you with everything I have." "You already are worthy of me," Clara said softly. "You showed me that the very first day when you put aside your own concerns to help a stranger. You have a good heart, James Cordell, and that is worth more than all the money in the world." James leaned in slowly, giving Clara time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a kiss full of promise and hope. Clara felt warmth spread through her entire body, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was right, that James was right, that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Thomas cleared his throat from the porch, and they turned to see him standing there trying to hide his own smile. "I take it you two have sorted things out?" he called. James laughed, a warm, genuine sound that Clara loved. "Yes, sir. I just asked your daughter for permission to court her, and she said yes. I hope that is acceptable to you." Thomas came down from the porch, his expression serious but not unkind. "James, in the past 2 weeks I have seen the kind of man you are. You are honest, hard-working, and you treat my daughter with respect. As far as I am concerned, you are welcome here any time, but I need to know your intentions are honorable." "They are, sir," James said firmly. "I intend to marry your daughter if she will have me. Not today or tomorrow, but when I have proven I can provide for her properly. I want to do this right." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good enough for me. Now, since you are here anyway, you might as well stay for breakfast. Clara has been practicing her biscuits, and they are almost as good as her mother's used to be." Over the following months, James became a regular fixture at the Bennett Ranch. He would come by every evening after finishing his work at the Triple Bar, often bringing small gifts: a ribbon for Clara's hair from the general store, a book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers picked on his ride over. They would walk together in the evenings, Clara showing him every corner of her family's land, sharing stories and dreams under the vast Wyoming sky. Clara learned more about James during those long walks. She learned about his childhood, moving from ranch to ranch, never having a real home. She learned about his father's death from a kick to the head by a half-wild stallion he was trying to break, and how James had become the man of the family overnight at 17. She learned about the guilt he still carried over leaving his sister to marry a man she barely knew, though Mary had insisted in her letters that she was happy. James, in turn, learned about Clara's grief over losing her mother, about how she sometimes still expected to see her in the kitchen or on the porch. He learned about Clara's fears for the ranch's future, about the weight of responsibility she carried. He learned about her dreams of expanding their herd, of making the ranch prosperous again. As autumn deepened into winter, James and Clara grew closer. Thomas watched their courtship with quiet approval, often finding excuses to leave them alone together. By the time the first snow fell in November, everyone in the area knew that James Cordell was courting Clara Bennett, and most agreed they made a fine match. It was in early December, on a clear, cold evening with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, that James asked Clara to marry him. They were standing on the porch of the ranch house, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching the snow-covered landscape shimmer in the moonlight. "Clara," James said quietly, "I know I said I wanted to wait until I had more to offer, but I cannot wait any longer. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You are my first thought in the morning and my last thought at night. You are my home, Clara, in a way no place has ever been. Would you marry me?" Clara turned to him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Yes, James. Yes, 1,000 times yes." James pulled a small box from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly despite the cold. Inside was a simple gold band with a small but beautiful blue stone. "It was my grandmother's ring," he explained. "My sister sent it to me after I wrote her about you. She said she could not think of anyone more deserving to wear it." Clara held out her hand, and James slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They kissed then, a long, deep kiss that warmed them both despite the winter cold. They were married in late January of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Cheyenne. Thomas walked Clara down the aisle, his eyes suspiciously bright. James's foreman and a few of his friends from the Triple Bar attended, along with several families from neighboring ranches who had known Clara all her life. It was not a grand affair, but it was perfect in its simplicity, full of genuine love and good wishes. James moved into the Bennett Ranch after the wedding, and he and Clara settled into the rhythms of married life with remarkable ease. James gave notice at the Triple Bar, and though his boss was sorry to lose such a skilled hand, he understood. The three of them, James, Clara, and Thomas, worked the ranch together, and with James's help, they were able to take on more cattle and begin making improvements. The first year of marriage had its challenges. There were disagreements about how to manage the ranch, difficult moments when James's wandering nature clashed with the need to stay put and work the land. There were times when Clara's stubborn independence frustrated James, and times when James's tendency to take risks worried Clara. But they learned to communicate, to compromise, to support each other through difficulties, and through it all, their love deepened and grew stronger. In November of 1883, Clara discovered she was pregnant. James was overjoyed, though also terrified at the prospect of becoming a father. Clara was calmer on the surface, but James knew she was equally nervous about the challenges of bringing a child into their hard-working life. Thomas was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather and immediately began making plans to add another room to the house. Their son was born in late June of 1884 during a brief, cool spell that made the delivery slightly more bearable. They named him William Thomas Cordell, after both of his grandfathers. James held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny, perfect features, the miniature fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," James whispered to Clara, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "You are amazing. I do not know how you did that." Clara smiled tiredly. "Women have been doing it since the beginning of time, but I am glad he is finally here." James leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I love you so much, Clara. Thank you for giving me a family, for giving me a home. I never thought I would have this." "You deserve this," Clara said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, James Cordell." As William grew, he proved to be a happy, energetic child who inherited his mother's stubbornness and his father's easy charm. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined efforts of the family. They expanded their herd, improved their bloodlines, and built a reputation for quality cattle. James's skill with horses added another income stream, as neighboring ranchers began bringing their difficult animals to him for training. Thomas aged gracefully, stepping back gradually from the hardest physical labor but remaining an invaluable source of knowledge and experience. He doted on his grandson, teaching William the same lessons he had once taught Clara. It was clear the boy had inherited the family love of ranching, always wanting to be wherever the action was, whether that was in the barn or out on the range. In the spring of 1886, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They named them Samuel and Elizabeth, and the household became even more lively with 3 young children. James added another room to the house, working long into the evenings by lamplight to complete it before the twins arrived. Clara marveled at how her life had changed in just 4 years, from the lonely girl who thought she might live her whole life unmarried, helping her father run the ranch, to a wife and mother surrounded by love and laughter. Life was not always easy. There were harsh winters when they worried about losing cattle to the cold. There were dry summers when the grass turned brown and water became scarce. There were injuries and illnesses, moments of fear when one of the children took ill, or when James took a fall from a spooked horse. But through it all, Clara and James faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Clara on a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving the children in Thomas's capable care. They rode out to the place where they had first met, that open grassland where Clara had been trying to herd cattle on a twisted ankle, and where James had ridden in to help. "I think about that day sometimes," Clara said as they sat together on a blanket, watching the sun set over the familiar landscape. "What might have happened if you had not come along when you did? Would I have managed to get those cattle rounded up eventually? Would we ever have met?" "I think we would have found each other somehow," James said, pulling her close against his side, "and some things are just meant to be." "You have given me such a beautiful life, James. I never imagined I could be this happy." James tilted her face up to his gray-blue eyes full of love and tenderness. "You gave me a home, Clara. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to stop wandering and put down roots. Before you, I was just drifting, never belonging anywhere. Now I belong with you, with our children on this land. You made me want to build something lasting." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Clara felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the very first time James had looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. The magic between them had not faded with time or familiarity. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by shared experiences and mutual support through life's challenges. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. William proved to be a natural horseman, just like his father, and by the age of 12 was helping to train the young horses. Samuel was more thoughtful and studious, showing an unexpected gift for figures that made him invaluable when it came to the business side of ranching. Elizabeth inherited her mother's stubborn determination and her father's charm, a combination that meant she could talk almost anyone into anything. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1895, at the age of 63. Though his death was not unexpected, given his age and declining health, it hit the family hard. Clara grieved for the father who had raised her with such love and patience, who had accepted James without reservation, who had adored his grandchildren and lived to see the ranch prosper beyond his wildest dreams. They buried him next to Clara's mother in the small cemetery outside Cheyenne, and Clara planted wildflowers on the grave every spring. After Thomas's death, Clara and James officially became the sole owners of what everyone now called the Cordell Ranch, though Clara insisted on keeping her maiden name as part of the brand, the Circle CB. Under their management, the ranch continued to grow. They bought additional land from a neighbor who was retiring, expanding their grazing territory significantly. James hired on several steady hands, remembering his own days as a wandering cowboy and making sure to treat his employees fairly and with respect. By the turn of the century, the Cordell Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the area. William, now a young man of 16, was already showing signs of being a capable rancher who would one day take over the family business. Samuel talked of going east for college, interested in learning modern business practices that could help the ranch thrive in the new century. Elizabeth, at 14, was already breaking hearts throughout the county and showing an interest in teaching, inspired by stories of the grandmother she had never met. On a warm evening in June of 1900, Clara and James sat together on the porch of their expanded house, watching their children play with the ranch dogs in the yard. James had threads of gray at his temples now, and Clara's auburn hair was beginning to show silver, but they were both still strong and vital, still working the ranch every day. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked quietly. "The wandering life? The freedom to go wherever you wanted?" James looked at her surprised. "Not for a moment. Why would I miss that when I have everything I could ever want right here? You are my adventure, Clara. Building this life with you has been more exciting than anything I experienced in all those years of drifting from place to place." Clara smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love you, James Cordell. I have loved you since the day you rode over that ridge and took charge of my scattered cattle with such confidence and skill. You quite literally swept me off my feet." James laughed, the sound warm and content. "Well, you were already off your feet, technically, sitting there in the shade with your twisted ankle. But I knew that day, even before I really understood it myself, that you were going to change my life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. The sound of their children's laughter floated up to them, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed as they settled for the night. It was a scene of such perfect peace and contentment that Clara felt her heart might burst with happiness. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" James asked, turning to look at her. "For riding over that ridge 18 years ago. For helping a stubborn girl who thought she could do everything alone. For teaching me that accepting help is not weakness, and that love is not a burden but a gift. For giving me this beautiful life, these wonderful children, this partnership that has made every day brighter." James lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the fingers that still wore his grandmother's ring. "The privilege has been all mine, Mrs. Cordell. I was just a wandering cowboy with no place to call home. You gave me everything that matters. You taught me that home is not a place, it is a person. It is you, Clara. It will always be you." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Clara thought about that day so long ago when a simple accident had changed the course of her entire life. She thought about the pain of her twisted ankle and the panic of watching her cattle scatter, never imagining that her moment of greatest vulnerability would lead to her greatest blessing. She thought about the stranger who had ridden to her rescue, not knowing that he was riding toward his own destiny as much as hers. Their story, Clara reflected, was like so many stories of the West, born of hardship and chance, forged through determination and hard work, and ultimately a testament to the power of love to transform lives. They had built something lasting together, not just the ranch with its thriving cattle and horses, but a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The children grew older still. William married a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch in 1903, and within a year, Clara and James became grandparents to a beautiful baby girl. Samuel did go east for his education, attending a business college in Chicago, but he returned to Wyoming with his degree and a wife, eager to apply his new knowledge to the family ranch. Elizabeth became a teacher, just as she had planned, but married a local rancher's son and continued teaching in the one-room schoolhouse near Cheyenne, dividing her time between educating the children of the area and helping her husband establish his own ranch. As Clara and James entered their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting William and Samuel to manage things with the same dedication and skill they had shown. But they never fully retired, always finding some task to occupy their days, whether it was working with a difficult horse, tending the garden, or spending time with their growing number of grandchildren. They made a point every year of riding out to that spot where they had first met. It became a ritual, a way of honoring the beginning of their love story. Sometimes they brought their children and grandchildren along, sharing the tale of how a twisted ankle and a passing cowboy had started it all. Sometimes they went alone, seeking the privacy to share the kind of intimacy that only comes from decades of love and partnership. On one such visit in the summer of 1910, Clara was 71 and James was 75. They were both moving more slowly now, with the inevitable aches and pains of age, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it burned brighter than ever, refined by time and trial into something precious and unshakable. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Clara asked, holding James's hand as they walked slowly across the familiar grassland. "When you told me to sit down before I fell down?" James chuckled. "I remember thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever met, trying to herd cattle on a badly sprained ankle. But I also remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even pale with pain and streaked with dust." "I thought you were bossy," Clara admitted, with a smile. "But I also thought you were the most capable, kindest man I had ever encountered. The way you took control of the situation without making me feel incompetent, the gentleness with which you handled everything, it touched my heart before I even knew your name." They reached the cottonwood trees where Clara had sat all those years ago, waiting for James to gather her scattered cattle. The trees were larger now, their branches spreading wide to provide generous shade. James spread out a blanket he had brought, and they sat together. Clara nestled against James's side just as she had in the early days of their courtship. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" James asked, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. "You told me this morning," Clara replied, "and yesterday evening and the day before that, but I never get tired of hearing it." "Good," James said, "because I plan to keep saying it every day for whatever time we have left. You are still the love of my life, Clara Cordell. You always will be." Clara turned in his arms to look at his face, seeing the lines that time had etched there, the gray in his hair, the weathering of decades spent outdoors. But she also saw the same gray-blue eyes that had captured her heart 28 years ago, the same kindness and strength that had drawn her to him from the very beginning. "I am so grateful for every day we have had together," she said softly. "Every moment, even the difficult ones, has been worthwhile because I have had you by my side. You made all my dreams come true, James. Not just the dreams I knew I had, but the ones I did not even know were possible until you showed me." They sat together as the afternoon sun moved across the sky, talking about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and its future, about all the memories they had accumulated over nearly 3 decades of marriage. They talked about the changes they had seen in Wyoming, from the wild frontier of their youth to the more settled territory it was becoming. They talked about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's company as they had done thousands of times before. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they both loved, James helped Clara to her feet, and they walked slowly back to where their horses were grazing. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the familiar landscape glowing in the golden light of evening. When they reached home, they were greeted by the sight of their grandchildren playing in the yard, watched over by William and his wife. That night, lying in bed with James's arms around her, Clara reflected on the incredible journey her life had been. From a young woman trying to prove her independence to a wife, mother, and grandmother surrounded by a loving family, she had experienced more joy than she had ever imagined possible. And it had all started with a twisted ankle and a cowboy who had stopped to help. "James," she whispered in the darkness. He responded, his voice drowsy and content. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" James pulled her closer. "Not a single thing." "Well, maybe I would have told you I loved you sooner, but beyond that, our story is perfect just the way it happened." Clara smiled in the darkness, feeling completely at peace. Their story was not the stuff of dime novels, with dramatic rescues and grand gestures. It was something better. A real love story, built on mutual respect, shared labor, daily kindnesses, and unwavering commitment. It was a love that had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, a love that had created life and built legacy. As she drifted off to sleep, safe in the arms of the man who had been her partner, her love, and her home for 28 years, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had been blessed beyond measure. A twisted ankle had seemed like a disaster on that September day in 1882, but it had actually been the beginning of everything good in her life. Sometimes, she thought, the best things come from the moments when we are most vulnerable, most in need of help, most willing to accept the kindness of strangers. And sometimes that stranger becomes the love of your life, the person who teaches you that strength comes not from doing everything alone, but from building a partnership with someone who sees your worth and chooses to stand beside you through everything life brings. That was what James had done for her, and what she had done for him, and it had made all the difference. Years later, long after Clara and James had both passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their story would be told and retold by their descendants. It would become part of the family legend, the tale of how the Cordell Ranch began, with a young woman herding cattle alone with a twisted ankle, and the cowboy who rode over and took the reins, not just of the cattle, but of her heart. And in the telling, it would remind each new generation that love often comes when we least expect it, in the moments when we are most vulnerable, and that the best partnerships are built not on grand gestures, but on daily kindnesses, mutual respect, and the willingness to face life's challenges together. The Cordell Ranch prospered for generations, a testament to the strong foundation Clara and James had built. Their children and grandchildren carried on the traditions they had established, treating the land with respect, the animals with care, and each other with love. And always, there would be a ritual visit to that special spot where it all began, where the grass grew green and the cottonwoods provided shade, where a love story born of necessity had blossomed into something eternal. Their graves, side by side in the cemetery outside Cheyenne, bore simple headstones with their names and dates. But the real monument to their love was the thriving ranch, the happy descendants, and the story itself, a tale of the Old West that proved love could bloom anywhere, even in the hardest soil, and that sometimes the best things in life begin with a twist of fate and the kindness of a stranger who becomes family.